I'll explain them as we go, but real quick, humans are known as humies. Space Marines are beakies. All Eldar...
Wait, beakies? The Space Marines are beakies? Stop. Oh wait, and the Eldar are scrawnies, pansies? Wow, that sounds like kind of derogatory. Hey guys, welcome back. We got another Warhammer 40k react, and we haven't covered anything about the orcs yet. So this is What Do the Orcs Think of Every Other Faction by WesHammer. So like that smash button and let's get into it.
According to recent polling data that I just made up, there isn't a single 40k fan in existence that doesn't love the orcs. If they say they don't, they're either lying or they hate fun. And
okay, I'll admit it, I really don't know anything about the 40k orcs like at all. So this is all gonna be new to me.
That's you. Who hurt you? Now, part of the charm of 40k as a franchise is how bleak, dark, and comically serious it often takes itself. But right when it's all starting to feel a little too depressing, the orcs come in like a giant green wrecking ball, ready to inject some much needed humor into the grimdark future. And what's not to love about these guys? They're a bunch of cockney football hooligans. They don't care about taking territory. They're not trying to build some grand empire. They don't even have an agenda to push. The only thing the orcs care about is fighting. And in their pursuit of getting into ever more crazy scraps, they've spread to every corner of the galaxy in order to give all of the other factions a, quote, proper kicking. What do the orcs think of all those other factions?
Proper kicking!
Do they think they're a bunch of weaklings and cowards, or do they have a lot of admiration for groups that can hold their own in a fight? Do they look at a species like, say, the Tau, who specialize in ranged warfare, as a bunch of cowards, or do they appreciate their taste in Daka? What are their thoughts on factions like the necrons?
Have you tried more Daka? Okay, what the hell is Daka?
Daka. What are their thoughts on factions like the Necrons, the Eldar, the Tyranids, Chaos, or the Imperium? Which ones do they like fighting against the most? And dare I say it, have any of them actually managed to earn the orcs' respect? What about some of the gods in this universe like Khorne or the Emperor? Do they respect them as avatars of war, or think they're a bunch of wimps waiting to—
I feel like they would respect Khorne because Khorne is like chaos and Khorne likes to fight people, and it seems like the orcs do too. So that would be my vote.
Get pasted by Gork and Mork. We're gonna get into all that.
Who the fuck is Gork and Mork?
And a whole lot more in this video, as I had nothing to do but research this one for the last week after catching COVID at a Magic the Gathering event. Which
yikes.
I know is an obvious thing to say now that I'm saying it out loud. It's like saying I caught the plague when I visited Nurgle's garden. It's like, what was I thinking? So yeah, sorry if I sound a little bit off in this one. I'm still kind of getting over it. But anyways, before we dive headfirst into the grimdark, a quick shout out to this video's sponsor. This video is sponsored by Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus, a fast-paced and exciting turn-based tactical strategy game set in the grimdark future. The big news this month is that Tacticus is celebrating their 2-year anniversary. Not only do they have a ton of exclusive content lined up,
this literally looks like
unique daily missions, offers, and rewards, but they're also introducing a brand new playable faction, the Exalted Ninth Legion, the Sons of Sanguinius. The Blood Angels are finally being added to the game. Starting on August 4th, you'll be able to unlock the first Blood Angels champion, the Jump Pack Intercessor Sergeant Matt Teneo, by participating in the weekly events. And then, starting on August 21st, there's going to be a 7-day Legendary Champion release event for the Lord of Death himself, Mephiston, Chief Librarian of the Blood Angels, and one of the most powerful Space Marines to have ever lived. My favorite thing about Tacticus is just how much there is to do. There's a ton of different game modes, including guild raids, multiple faction-specific campaigns, PvP arena battles, constant special events, and over 70 legendary Warhammer 40,000 champions to collect and battle with, from 16 playable factions, with new ones being added all of the time. With the 2-year anniversary event about to kick off, there's never been a better time to either come back to Tacticus or start playing for the first time. Click on my link in the description of this video to download and play the game for free today. A huge thank you to Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus for being such a longtime sponsor of this channel. I probably don't need to tell you this.
So I wonder if the orcs are kind of like the Skaven. Like, it seems like the orcs plan less than the Skaven, because the Skaven has plans and then they go awry, but the orcs just like go like balls to the walls and like fight people is what it sounds like, but they're both like crazy, you know?
But Warhammer 40k can get pretty dark. The Milky Way galaxy of the 41st millennium is one where hatred and loathing have been allowed to fester and spread unchecked through the minds and hearts of nearly every spacefaring species.
W to hatred and loathing, am I right?
When we try to measure how they all feel about each other, it's ultimately an exercise in splitting hairs over who they each hate the most. But right at the moment we're about to give up hope that anybody could be having a good time in the grimdark future, we're introduced to everyone's favorite boys, the Orks, a bunch of fighting-obsessed Cockney hooligans who rampage across the galaxy looking for a good scrap to get stuck in. If you know anything about 40K, I don't need to tell you just how amazing and hilarious they are, even if the people in universe absolutely hate them. They're like a hurricane of violence that carves a bloody path across the stars and kills anyone that gets in their way. But from our perspective, they seem to have a pretty good sense of humor about
having
the whole
a good time.
and their passion for fighting is pretty damn infectious. The funny thing about orcs is that all of the fighting they do isn't motivated by hatred for their enemies like most other species. In fact, hate is kind of a foreign emotion to the orcs. They have no concept of what it's like to hate something. Now sure, there's things they don't like much or maybe find annoying, but they have a simple and elegant solution for that. They just fight those things, which is what they love to do and thus what they assume everybody else in the universe loves as well. And speaking of fighting, it's pretty much the only thing that the orcs care about. You gotta remember that they were created 60 million years ago by the old ones as living.
So they're just doing it for the love of the game, is what I'm hearing.
Weapons to fight against the necrons. Every single aspect of them, all the way down to their genetics, was designed for combat. Fighting isn't just something they enjoy, it's everything to them. It is a biological need in much the same way that food or drink is for us. Because of this, the lens that the orcs view their galactic neighbors through is almost always framed by how good of a scrap they can give the boys. Now, what the orcs actually think about all of the other species they routinely go up against is admittedly one of those topics that isn't nearly as fleshed out as it could be. Insight into orc philosophy used to be pretty rare until we started getting all of the Mike Brooks orc novels that were written from their perspective.
There's orc novels too? Should I read one of them? Let me know if you would recommend an orc novel to me.
So Brutal Cunning, War Boss, and Big Daka, as well as a bunch of short stories and the orc codexes, are going to serve as the primary sources for all of the information in this video. And because this script was made using sources almost exclusively written from their perspective, I'm gonna do honor to the orcs and use all of their preferred names for different factions. Now, I'll explain them as we go, but real quick, humans are known as humies. Space Marines are beakies. All Eldar—
Wait, beakies? The Space Marines are beakies? Stop. Oh wait, and the Eldar are scrawnies, pansies? Wow, that sounds like kind of derogatory.
Are scrawnies or pansies in the older lore, and their Dark Eldar variant is known as the Spikies.
The Spikies!
Tau are fish heads or fish boys.
Fish
Tyranids
boys.
are bug eyes. Necrons, and pretty much all robots for that matter, are known as tin heads, tin boys, the tins, or the tins. Chaos Space Marines are the chaos lads with the spikes, and
Stop. Yo, look at those chaos lads with the spikes. I mean, they're not wrong. Like, as advertised. I love that.
Spikes, and my personal favorite, demons are known as, quote, chaos gribblies. We're going to kick things off with
chaos gribblies.
Thoughts on humans, as by far there's more information about their feelings on them than any other faction. And by examining how they view our species, we get a good framework of Orky values that we can use to understand their relationship with Chaos and other Xenos. You may be surprised to hear this, but the orcs are not particularly renowned for being especially deep thinkers. A fun fact, one of the things that starts to happen to them as they grow big—
Shoot more. Something hit Daka. What is Daka? Is that like shooting? Oi. Starter G. That's actually hilarious.
A fun fact, one of the things that starts to happen to them as they grow bigger from surviving a ton of battles is that their brains start growing as well, and also start thinking a whole bunch more, which is something that the orcs find particularly annoying. Since the vast majority of them will get killed before they ever reach what we would consider smart, it shouldn't come as a surprise that they don't really take the time to observe all of the different nuances between Humi factions. The Sisters of Battle, the Astra Militarum, the Imperial Navy, it doesn't matter. They're all just Humies to the orcs. This extends to even
factions
that we as the audience would consider so radically different that they're almost a different species entirely, like the cyborg tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus, or even—
Yo, those cyborg tech priests are like so fucking awesome. Like, I've been playing Rogue Trader and I recruited the cyborg tech priest, and I feel like he's so awesome when you use him in combat because he could just like smack people over the like head. He has, what is it called? He has like this like big like mallet thing. I think it's like a staff, but it's like he, instead of like casting spells, he can like hit people with it, but it's like not a staff because it's like shorter than that. What is this called? It's like a mace. It's like a mace. Okay, that's the word I'm looking for. But he also does like crazy machine like magic to like destroy like other machines. Like, it's so awesome.
Even the friggin' Gene Stealer cults. The former is just the Humy equivalent of mech boys to the orcs, and the latter is a bunch of funny looking Humies with too many arms. There is, of course, one major exception to this rule, and that's the Space Marines, or the Beakies as the orcs call them, due to the fact that the Mark VI Corvus pattern power armor looks kinda like a bird. The other most common variant of Space Marine armor has a faceplate that the orcs think looks like an orc when he's straining too hard at the drops, which is their word for a latrine. Now that obviously doesn't make for a good nickname, so no matter what armor they're in, all Space Marines are Beakies. But we'll get into their thoughts on Space Marines later in this video. In multiple scenes throughout the Orc novels by Mike Brooks and many codexes and campaign supplements from the last few decades, we get some direct quotes from the Orcs that give us a lot more insight into their views here. From their perspective, Humies are kind of weird. They're fun to fight for reasons that we'll get into shortly, but culturally, they just do a lot of things that don't make any sense. Like, for example, one of the Orcs' favorite pastimes other than fighting is looting. And when they end up stealing a Humie vehicle, their excitement of getting their hands on some new wheels is almost always soured by what they find inside. You see, Humies have this really annoying habit of putting all of their flashy buttons and lights on the inside of their vehicles, which, as every good orc knows, flashy gubbins are meant to go on the outside to show off to all the other boys.
Yes, the fuck is wrong with you, Beakies and Humies? Like, show flashy things outside, okay?
These Humie vehicles normally have a good old-fashioned set of wheels or tracks that they ride around on, which is something that the orcs respect. But unfortunately, this isn't always the case. When they fight against the Admech, for example, or the Red Robes as they call them, their tanks float around like the vehicles of the Scrawnies, the Fishheads, the Tin Boys, and the Spikies. Some orcs believe this is why the Red Robes are so soft. If your ride isn't constantly being bombarded with bumps and shocks strong enough to compress your spine, you'll never be proper hard. Another thing that perplexes them—
Yo, if your like ride is too smooth, you're just like a soy boy at that point.
about Humies and their trucks is that they all tend to drive on these big lines in the dirt called roads or bridges or some other stupid Humie word. They don't understand why they don't just drive wherever they want like the orcs do. Likewise, they have this hilariously weird habit of putting wheels on the doors inside of their ships and gargants, which, as every orc knows, you can't drive a door, but Humies just ain't logical. Humies also have this weird invention called an alarm system that's only purpose seems to be to get all of the Humies all riled up and scared before a fight. Why they would invent something like this is completely beyond them. Every self-respecting orc knows that before you get stuck in, you and the lads have to amp yourself up with some hooting, hollering, and a nice loud wah at the top of your lungs. Not purposely—
You gotta do a call to wah, not get scared.
There's feelings of fear and dread in you and all of your mates. Why they would make something like this, let alone put it on all of their buildings that contain all of their best loot, is something that continues to vex the orcs to this day. Humies also love wasting time building things that don't seem to have any practical application, like libraries, schools, hospitals, or even cathedrals to some bloke named the God Emperor.
Yeah, like, who the fuck is this God Emperor? Who fucking cares? Just take his shit and fight them.
Beings of logic like the orcs would never build anything that wasn't specifically going to be used in a fight. Weapons, armor, and even some of the weird mech boy inventions all had a purpose. But with Humies, 90% of what they made was practically worthless, at least when it came to their buildings.
Yeah, like this library shit, this gotta go.
Knew to make them real big. That was something that the orcs respected. It made it more fun to knock them over. Now, although Humie cathedrals are a bit much for the orcs, all of the statues depicting the Emperor is something that they can at least wrap their minds around. although they've never seen him, considering that he's normally depicted as being 100 feet tall with a giant flaming sword. He's clearly either the boss of all the Humies or their god. Either way, it would make sense to them that he told all of the smaller Humies to build all these things, and they have to listen to him because, again, he's the boss. Now, don't get it twisted. The god of the Humies in no way, shape, or form could stand up to true and proper gods like Gork and Mork. But so far as they can tell, if they ever manage to make it
wait, are Gork and Mork the orc gods?
All the way to Terra and break into the Golden Throne, they're gonna get to fight a 100-foot tall Humie. So that's something that all of the orcs are looking forward to. Now, it makes sense to the orcs that the Emperor is in charge, because based on all of the artwork they've seen, he's the biggest. This is how the orcs do things. The biggest orc is the boss. Not just because he's stronger than all of the other boys, but because orcs get bigger the more fights they get in. So a proper big orc has a whole bunch of experience and thus makes for a better leader. But aside from the Emperor and the Beakies, all of the other Humies are the same size. So they're always arguing with each other about who's in charge. This is something the boys just don't really understand, and thus Humie hierarchy of command is still an enigma to them.
You know, I like how that just cuts through a lot of red tape. Like, the biggest one is in charge and we all just go with it. I love that for them.
They think they should do is just fight it all out and figure out who's the biggest and strongest and make them the boss. But you gotta remember that Humies just ain't logical. They do things that don't make sense, and oftentimes it's better just not to think about it. Also, in their defense, Humies are pink or brown, fragile and soft, not tough and green like the boys. And as Uthak pointed out in Brutal Cunning, they die a lot easier as well. If all of the Humies started fighting each other, they'd all just be dead, and then there would be no Humies for the orcs to crump.
And that
They're
would
too
suck
weak for that kind of thing. And since they clearly want to keep fighting the orcs, they assume that the Humies have had to make a few sacrifices in this department for the greater good of fighting. Now, Humies have a lot of faults, don't get it twisted. They do a lot of weird stuff that just doesn't make any sense, and they waste an enormous amount of time not fighting when they could spend time fighting.
Yeah,
but
they could.
Even after all that, the orcs absolutely love them, even if they would never admit it out loud or even understand their affinity for them.
Because they love fighting them and love looting from them. And if they're gone, who are they gonna fight and who are they gonna loot from? Yeah, I see where this is going.
It's for two major reasons. One, even though they're not as good at fighting as the orcs, there's a lot of Humies. Now, we as the audience know that the orcs outnumber the Humies some 1,000 to 1.
Wait, they do? Wait, the orcs outnumber the Humies? What the f? This is like terrifying.
Do so quickly. But the orcs don't know this. From their perspective, it looks like Humies are everywhere. They can be found in every corner of the galaxy. And no matter how much time they spend fighting them, there's always more Humies. Every time you kill one, 10 more show up to take their place. And honestly, you couldn't ask for a better trait to have in an enemy. And two, although admittedly inferior to orc technology, the tech that Humies make is easily a close second, especially when compared to the strange, esoteric machines utilized by other Xeno species. Humie weapons and armor are powerful, efficient, reliable, and most importantly, they look like what they're supposed to be. A gun looks like a gun. A sword looks like a sword.
Nice.
A tank looks like a tank. Now compare that to all of the stuff used by the Spikies and the Scrawnies. Their weapons are dainty little things that no self-respecting orc would ever be caught dead wielding.
They're like cute. I'll take one.
Now, the only real issue that orcs have with Humie gear is that, quite frankly, it's boring. Humies are always unoriginal, and as a species, they fundamentally lack creativity. Their mech boys just don't have the pizzazz or flair of an orc mech boy, and this leads to all of their equipment looking exactly the same, meaning that none of them can ever tell whose stuff belongs to who. If you were to throw a whole bunch of orc guns into a pile, each of them would be able to tell immediately which one was theirs, or at least which one they liked better. And then they could probably bash the true owner's teeth in and take it for themselves.
Nice.
Now don't get me wrong, this isn't a deal breaker for the orcs when it comes to measuring up whether a species is a good enemy or not. In fact, Humie gear is their favorite thing to loot aside from looting gear from other orcs. Humie gear is like a blank canvas that the orcs can work their magic on and make it proper orky. This normally takes the form of just gluing and welding a whole bunch of extra metal and scrap to them to make them extra killy. If, for example, beaky power claws work pretty good. They're just unoriginal. They look like a big Humie hand and don't have, big metal claws on them like a proper power claw. But that's nothing that can't be fixed with a bit of orky ingenuity.
Fightin' Uva gits.
Okay, let's get into
Fighting over gifts? Is that what that meant?
To what everybody actually cares about. What do the orcs think of fighting against the humies? How do they measure up when compared to every other species? Do the orcs love it or find them annoying? Are they the orcs' preferred enemy, or does that esteemed title go to a different faction? Honestly, fighting humies is kind of a mixed bag for the orcs. They have some qualities that make them a great proper enemy, while other things, not so much. One-on-one, a humie doesn't even come close to an orc. They're short, squishy, soft,
that's the truth.
And most of them are cowards, with, of course, the exception of Old Baelai and the Beakies. They're proper hard.
Wait, who's Old Baelai? I need to know these prominent characters. And Old Beaky, I guess, is an old space marine.
Humies are also just not really built for fighting. The orc's head is centered down low between their shoulders in the middle of their chest where they can keep it safe. But the humies have their head on top of their shoulders, just waiting for it to get knocked off. That's why humie dreadnoughts, knights, and titans look more like an orc than a humie. If they were built like a humie with their head on top of their shoulders, they would probably just wander around the battlefield all stupid-like until they got knocked over and killed. As I mentioned earlier in the video, humie tech is not as good as orc tech. But the orcs will be the first to tell you that it's pretty damn efficient. It's good at killing, and at least most of their guns actually sound like proper Daka. Not that pew-pew stuff that the fish heads, the tinnies, and the scrawnies use. Or the gross squishy things that the bug eyes fight with that aren't even actually weapons. Also, humies almost always understand proper fighting etiquette, a rarity in the grimdark future. They tend to show up to the fight with a whole lot of boys for the orcs to crump.
Oh,
this is a kindness and a showing of respect that is not lost on the orcs. It's real.
The orcs are like, you brought all your boys for me to kill. You know what? Respect. Respect. They love it.
Neighborly of them, and the lads appreciate it. Even if the orcs don't really differentiate much between all of the different humie clans, they can at least recognize that certain groups of humies utilize different tactics, strategies, and war machines, and that's something that the orcs appreciate. Every orc will tell you that variety is the spice of life when it comes to fighting, and the humies, to their credit, do a pretty good job of always keeping things interesting. With them, you never really know what you're gonna get. Even if some cowardly groups of humies like to use long-range artillery to paste all the boys before the fighting even really gets started. That, admittedly, is something they find annoying.
Not cool,
but even still, they recognize that this is only one humie tactic, and having a whole lot of different ways to conduct a fight is an important trait when measuring if someone's a good enemy or not.
Tin boys.
What about the necrons, or the tin boys as the orcs call them? Are they as
That's what they meant, the robot boys.
good of an enemy as the humies? Well, they're certainly a lot tougher than humies. Most of them can take a hit without even flinching. And the best part about the tinnies is that when you're done killing all of them, they'll use their reanimation protocols, stitch themselves back together, and stand back up. Then the boys—
Wait, I didn't even know that. That's so fucking awesome. They're just like unkillable. Just, it's like, oh, you're gonna blow me up? I stitch myself back together and then come back at you.
can kill them all over again. Any orc who's ever tried to do this with humies will tell you that it's not nearly as fun. Now, that being said, no enemy is truly perfect, and the tin boys do have a few flaws. Although their tenaciousness is greatly appreciated, fights against them can start to feel kinda samey after a while. It all starts to get a little bit dull. Most of the tin boys are—
Damn, they're just like falling off because they're a little too samey and they're not innovating. Sad. I expected more out of the tinnies, to be honest.
are mindless automatons that fight in complete silence. No war cries, no screams of pain, nothing to get the blood pumping. They just don't have the passion for fighting like orcs or even some humies do. That being said, the tinnies do have some pretty great tech to loot. Sure, their tanks might float around and their guns may not be very loud, but they're proper killy and can unleash some pretty hilariously devastating effects on the battlefield. The orcs will routinely do everything they can to try to loot them. Only problem is, most of the time, when they get into a fight with them, after they finish giving them a good kicking and the tins start to run for it, they and all of their equipment starts to fade out of existence, just completely disappearing and leaving no spoils for the boys, which is real sore loser behavior. This isn't exactly why—
It's kind of fucked up. Like, they can't even like get spoils for the boys. Why is their equipment disappearing? Is it like teleporting it back to like the tinny capital or something?
Widespread information, but there are some orcs that know the secret. That the best way to start looting tinny gear is not to fight them. It's to sneak into their tombs while they're all still asleep. This is what the Death Skulls orcs of Zort did a little while ago. Once they got inside, they proceeded to start looting like crazy. But their rambunctious enthusiasm unfortunately ended up triggering the tomb's reanimation protocols, and the boys soon found themselves surrounded by thousands of canoptic constructs. Far from being intimidated, the boys were absolutely delighted. They started scavenging and stealing like crazy and ended up using all of the Tin Boy gear to cobble together hordes of cyborgs and morkanauts and ever more improbable super weapons.
Oh shit. Imagine orcs with all these super weapons.
While also hijacking some Dolem gates to ferry in wave upon wave of reinforcements. By the time the fighting was done and Overlord Thamtek the Magnificent awoke to take command of his legions, he opened his eyes to the sight of an entire mob of leering mech boys standing over his sarcophagus, evil gleams in their eyes and revving power tools in their hands.
The fish boys!
And speaking of valuable tech and those who utilize it, the Tau, or the Fish Boys, have some of the fanciest tech worth looting. And their stuff is a bit—
Wait, why are they the Fish Boys? They look like— aren't the Tau like robots too? Like, what's going on?
Easier to figure out than the Tin Boy machines. The orcs will routinely mock the Fish Boy weapons for not looking nor sounding like proper Daka.
Oh no, they're like some alien people. I got them a little mixed up in my mind.
None will argue their effectiveness. This often makes them preferred raiding targets for the orcs from the Bad Moon clan. For example, there was a massive colony seeding ship originally known as the Hope's Light in their fishy language that was captured by Megaboss Mokrog and turned into his looted flagship, now appropriately renamed the Tau Killa. The boss has now been using this to wage unending war on the Kalshan Sept for about 200 years. So yeah, they've got some pretty good stuff to loot. But when it comes to fighting against the Fish Boys, it's ultimately a pretty frustrating affair for the orcs. You see, the thing about Fish Boys is they really don't like it when you hit them in the teeth with a choppa. So they'll do everything they can to put as much distance between themselves and the orcs as possible. This means that almost always, without fail, the boys will suffer unprecedented losses in the initial charge, and will almost never get the satisfaction of a good old-fashioned brawl with an enemy that actually hits you back when fighting against them. Now, you would think
that kind of sucks.
Would be something that would either cause them to change up their tactics or lose interest in fighting them. But it's not like that at all. They just accept that this is part of the territory with the fishies. Sure, it's a bit annoying, but the delay just makes it all the more satisfying when you do finally get your hands on the gits.
Well, they're like, you know, that's just the way it be sometimes. And it seems like they can actually get some good loot out of these, like not like the Chinnies who are like stingy with their loot, apparently.
Plus, the initial losses just mean that there'll be more Fish Boys to crump for all the boys that do survive the charge. They might put too much focus in their Daka and negate the joy of variety in a fight, but at least the fishies seem enthusiastic and passionate about fighting in their own weird fishy way. The Scrawnies, on the other hand, well, let's get into it.
Oh, this is the Eldar? The Scrawnies?
Scrawnies and Spikies, also known as the Eldari and the Drukhari, are probably the most annoying of all enemies that the orcs—
I feel like the Scrawnies is a little mean to the Eldar, okay? Like, I feel like they'd be insulted to know that the orcs are like, yeah, the scrawny bitches over there.
Routinely fight. Somehow, they manage to be even
I fear no man, but that thing, it scares me. Yeah.
More cowardly than Humies, which in and of itself is at least impressive. For some reason that the orcs just can't wrap their heads around, the Scrawnies seem to be more afraid of dying than any other species in the entire galaxy. Something about some pink god, it doesn't matter. They don't pay too much attention to any gods that aren't Gork or Mork, as the rest of them are just a bunch of wimps not worth thinking about. Besides, every orc knows there's only two possible things that can happen when you die. Either nothing happens and then you're not bothered because there's nothing, or you go to the Great Green and meet Gork and Mork, who then subsequently reincarnate you back into the body of a new orc, so you can go back to fighting and do it all again. Death isn't something that the orcs are afraid of. I mean, it's something to be avoided if it can be helped, but being afraid of it just ain't logical. Also, all of the Scrawnies, be they pointy heads, clowns, or spikies, have this real undeserved arrogance about them that the orcs find off-putting. It's like they approach the galaxy.
Undeserved arrogance? I feel like it's pretty deserved arrogance, in my opinion.
As though it should automatically behave the way they want it to, and then they get very miffed when it routinely doesn't. Just like how the Humies do things the Orcs find baffling, it's much the same way with the Scrawnies, but somehow even worse. At the end of the day,
I could definitely see that. I think the Humies, they're like, this is kind of illogical, but whatever, they're fun. But with the Scrawnies, they're like, these people have lost their goddamn minds, and they're probably not wrong.
Cowardly, weak, and oftentimes stupid as Humies is, they at least kinda sorta function in a vaguely similar manner to the Orcs. They're just really bad at being Orcs. But the Scrawnies go one step further and do things that actively annoy them. They follow the same path as the Tin Boys and the Fishheads, in that they make all of their trucks float around on grav lifts rather than being set on good old wheels and tracks.
Yeah.
Also, if their guns do make any noise, it's all weird sounds that certainly aren't DACA. A proper gun should have enough recoil that
what is DACA?
it almost breaks your shoulder with every shot. But just like with other species, every orc that's ever fought against the Scrawnies and lived long enough to have another go knows that looks can be deceiving. Just like their owners, Scrawny guns are skinny, flimsy things that you could easily break over your knee without much effort. But they pack one hell of a punch. They may be weird and stupid looking, but at the end of the day, they're right killy. And from the Orcs' perspective, that's something you gotta respect. Now, that's mostly just in theory, because when the Orcs do actually get to fight against the Scrawnies, and this goes doubly for the Spikies, it's almost never as fun as it should be. They almost exclusively fight with hit-and-run style tactics, striking from the shadows, and only getting stuck in a fight they're 100% sure them and their mates can win without getting hit back.
That's like my style of fighting, like hit-and-run tactics, stealth, archery,
now, sure,
bullshit is where I'm at.
If a line of boys and a line of Scrawnies all charged at each other, both sides knew there was only one possible outcome, and it would involve the Scrawnies getting a good kicking. But Scrawnies didn't fight like Orcs. They were always thinking about stuff. And the spiky ones had this annoying habit of laying traps to draw a couple of mobs off at a time and pick them off one by one, which was just rude. They didn't even give the rest of the boys a chance to get in on the scrap.
Damn.
Also, with the Spikies in particular, they have this weird fascination with fighting things that can't or won't fight back. This behavior is anathema to the Orcs. It's the equivalent of shooting at rocks, which, sure enough, could be fun for
when in doubt, shoot
at least a little while.
Yes.
But the point of a fight.
What do you mean they have a fascination with fighting things that won't fight back? Like, are they trying to fight like the warp itself or something?
Was the fight, where your blood was pumping and Gork and Mork were roaring in your ears. It's not fun unless the other git is looking to take your head off in return. Further, the Spikies seem to take pleasure in not just killing and fighting, but actively hurting their enemies, even after the fight is done. Sometimes they would even try to capture their enemies, avoiding the fight altogether, just so they could hurt them. Now, torture is something that Orcs just can't wrap their heads around.
Interesting.
Why would you waste time poking at your enemy like this when you could just move on to another one and keep fighting? No self-respecting Orc would ever engage in torture, not even to their worst enemy.
That's interesting. I didn't see that coming, to be honest. I thought they would engage with it for sure.
The very idea makes them sick. Well, unless it was funny. Then they definitely would, and have many times in the past. But that's different. So
it's very different. Totally different situation.
Scrawnies use tactics that aren't much fun to fight against. And since they're a dying species and all, there's not very many of them. Both things that don't rank highly when it comes to traits of a good enemy. So is there anything redeeming about them at all? Well, kind of, at least to some Orcs. When it comes to looting, as I mentioned before, the Orcs find the aesthetics of scrawny weaponry to be pretty off-putting, but they do respect its power. Likewise, they're fascinated by scrawny armor, as even though it's no thicker than an Orc's finger, it's capable of stopping a bullet or a choppa just as well as a hunk of steel as big as an Orc's fist. It's way too small for the Orcs to wear though, and even if they could fit into it, they know they'd be the laughingstock of their mates. So if they do use it, they have to bash it into the shape of something that's at least not completely humiliating. The rest of the Scrawny's gear, though, has a bunch of weird properties, like the ability to make portals or make things float that have no business floating. This loot is highly sought after by the mech boys, who will often pay a pretty hefty price in teeth for whatever boy manages to bring some in, so it at least has value in that aspect.
The bug eyes.
Now, the bug eyes,
Who are these?
also known as the tyranids, are probably about as far from scrawny.
These guys are like my fucking nightmares. They're like an alien spider. No.
As you can get. Not only do they seem to love fighting, but there's an endless variety of different types of them. Not to mention the best part, there's a lot of them. They reproduce just as quickly, if not even faster than the orcs do. So when the boys find a planet currently being overrun by bug eyes, they know they're going to have more entertainment than they know what to do with. There's just a couple of small issues when it comes to fighting them. First is that whereas the scrawnies think way too much, the bug eyes don't really think of much of anything at all. They're like big squigs in that regard to the orcs. The only thing they're concerned with is getting their teeth into their next meal. Now sure, sometimes they may look organized and like they're working together, but remember, looks can be deceiving.
Shoot more.
All the boys gotta do is pop one of the big brain-looking bug eyes, and the rest of them go absolutely nuts.
Oh.
Which, in fairness, is always good for a laugh. The second issue that they have with them is that there's just not much they can loot from them. All of the bug eye weaponry isn't much use to them.
Ooh, that is like a cool looking like alien bug gun thing.
Orc. They're all fleshy, rotting organs and not proper daka.
Ew.
Now that being said, their
gross.
teeth, scything talons, and chitinous armor plating can be fashioned into some pretty good gear with a little orky ingenuity.
Ooh.
But most orcs prefer metal equipment, something the bug eyes just can't offer them. Now, of course, fighting is what truly matters. No orc would argue against this, but looting is important too. If fighting was a cake, then looting would be the frosting. And everyone knows that cakes always taste better with frosting.
Oh yeah.
Unless it's cheesecake,
sure.
but I'm getting ahead of myself. I don't think there's a single orc out there that doesn't like fighting against the bug eyes, but some orcs like it way more than all the rest. The snakebites, for example, a more primitive orc clan that follows what they call the old ways, enjoys the thrill of the hunt and routinely targets bug eyes and other big beasties as their preferred enemy type.
What else entails like the old ways of the orcs, I wonder?
There's actually one tribe of snakebite orcs in particular, known as the worm killers, that have taken this to an entirely different level. You see, at one point, this clan was fighting against the bug eyes in some jungle on a backwater world where they discovered a big fleshy bug eye spore.
Ew,
they brought it back
so
to
gross.
their fleet and cracked it open, and out came hundreds of tiny baby bug eyes that quickly ran off in every direction.
Oh my god,
They would soon find that these creatures grew really quickly, and they were delighted to find their cruiser in a very short period completely overrun with them. No sooner had they bashed one in than another would appear out of a vent or a drain. Now eventually, the cruiser was completely infested and became the mirror image of the tyrannid-infested jungle from before. The only orcs that ended up surviving were these snakebites, who had become absolute experts in hunting these beasties. Eventually, they managed to kill all of them, and when they met up with a bunch of other orcs, they were absolutely covered from head to toe in tyrannid trophies, and had taken on the name Worm Killers. This experience had been so much fun for them that they decided to hunt down more of those spore pods, which they would then subsequently bring to new worlds, pop them open on their surface, and then leave for a few years, only to return to a planet completely overrun by bug eyes. It was perfect. Not only were all of the humies that lived on these worlds super mad, which the worm killers found really funny, but now they had a whole new planet of bug eyes to smash. Although exact numbers can't be confirmed, it's estimated that the worm killers have unleashed a bug eye Armageddon on dozens of worlds.
Oh my god, I think that's actually like the worst, but probably the most powerful thing they could do is release a bug Armageddon on other worlds. Like, no, like these people are a force to be reckoned with, actually.
Ensuring that they're never far away from a good fight.
The beakies.
Now, the beakies are probably the most classic
Wow, I like totally forgot about the Space Marines.
and iconic of all of the orcs' enemies, and it's a huge reason why they enjoy fighting against the humies so much. Pretty much every major weakness that the humies have when it comes to being a proper enemy, the beakies have fixed. Humans by tradition are soft and cowardly, but beakies are proper hard. In their armor, they're about on
stay hard.
par with an orc in terms of size, durability, and strength. And maybe not a war boss or a knob, but at least your run-of-the-mill boy. They're also far more aggressive than regular humies, and are not prone to streaks of cowardice. Honestly, the way the orcs see them, the beakies are more like them than any other living creature in the entire galaxy. They're like kindred spirits, so to speak. The beakies understand that a fight is something you run towards and not away from. They're tough, strong, fast, and they'll keep fighting even after they've taken a good kicking. Not to mention, they've got good taste in both armor and dakka. Their bolters are good and loud, just like the orcs' guns, and their armor is much more well-made than all of that other Humie stuff, making it some of the orcs' favorite equipment to loot. Now, it should come as no surprise that the orcs have a lot of respect for them, but they're not perfect. First and foremost, there's not nearly enough of them. Somehow, they might even be rarer than the scrawnies. And much to the orcs' disappointment, most of the time when they go to fight the Humies, there isn't even a
Wait, I didn't realize that there weren't enough, like, space marines.
Single beaky to bash. Second, like I mentioned earlier in the video, the orcs don't really understand the concept of hate. Anything they find annoying, they'll just fight.
You know, that's interesting that they don't like hate people because all they want to do is fight other people, and that's very quirky of them.
But the beakies, on the other hand, seem to be entirely consumed by hatred for anything and everyone that isn't a Humie. Hatred drips out of every one of their pores and motivates every action they take and every decision they make. Now, sure, them being so hateful made them a bit more fun to fight, but some of the more thinky orcs actually kind of pity them in a way, which is another emotion the orcs aren't used to dealing with and they find it annoying.
Wow, it must be really bad when the thinky orcs pity you and your pathetic ass.
You see, beakies are so consumed by hatred and an underlying bitterness that they're robbed of the joy they should be experiencing in a fight. It's like, dude, why are you so angry? We are actively engaged in the most fun thing you can possibly do, fighting. For the orcs to think that you need to take a chill pill is at least some kind of accomplishment.
Seriously. Lads with the spikes.
Now, whereas the orcs don't really think much about the different chapters of Space Marines outside of the different color that they paint their armor, they do at least recognize that there's at least two different types of beakies, because the Chaos lads with the spikes have a completely different group of mates they pal around with. Now, all beakies are proper hard, don't get it twisted, but the Chaos beakies bring a lot more variety to the table when getting stuck in. Whether they be the blue weird boy beakies that cast all kinds of weird unnatural powers, the smelly green beakies that know how to take a punch, the strange pink beakies that, if I'm just being honest, the orcs find pretty weird, or their favorite, the red beakies that seem to love fighting almost as much as the orcs do. The major issue with them, though, is that the Chaos lads with the spikes do a lot of weird stuff. Not only that, they often seem to have an agenda other than just fighting. In a lot of ways, they're more like regular Humies in that aspect and less like true beakies, at least as far as the orcs are concerned. When it comes to the Chaos gods themselves, they're not really worth thinking about. Even though Khorne is absolutely obsessed with the orcs, he finds them deeply fascinating and entertaining. No proper orc would ever for a moment consider worshipping a puny Humie god.
I respect that. Yeah, don't worship a puny Humie god.
And Mork were the only true gods any orc would ever associate with. Now, all that being said, in their defense, the Chaos Boys are probably the kings of variety when it comes to fighting. You never really know what to expect with them, and thus their fights never get dull. When dealing with the warp and all of the strange, unnatural things that come out of it, things routinely get pretty weird to say the least. Especially when you're dealing with the Chaos Griblies, or the demons as the Humies call them. They can show up seemingly out of thin air when you're stuck in a fight with the Chaos lads, or even when you're out in the warp minding your own business. The orcs view the demonic incursions of Griblies onto their ships as a good bit of sport, a fun way to pass the time on long journeys. And sure, Griblies are fun enough to fight, certainly is a nice change of pace between mutinies, but no matter how brutal and vicious they are, they're ultimately just not that satisfying to kill. When the orcs crump them, they just dematerialize, disappearing as if they were made of smoke. Now, every orc knows that the best part of the fight is when you lop off the enemy git's head and all the blood goes gushing out.
I bet.
They never get that satisfying payoff with the Griblies, which ultimately just leaves them pretty pent up and frustrated. So most of the time, after they fight them, they just go back to fighting themselves. So the Chaos lads with the spikes have their place in the hierarchy of enemies, just like the Griblies and the rest of the species within the Milky Way. Unfortunately though, there are some enemies that we know the orcs get stuck in with pretty frequently that have yet to be written about from their perspective, so we can only really speculate on how they feel about them. Now hopefully when Games Workshop decides to flesh out the Leagues of Votan, or the Stunties as they used to be called in old lore by the orcs, we'll also get a few stories from the orcs' perspective to see what they think about them. Likewise, the custodians, who we can assume they would love because they're like bigger, harder beakies with way better gear to loot, would be right at the top of the list for the orcs' preferred enemies. But as of the time of this recording, we haven't gotten a book that lets us see inside of their head while they're fighting against them, which is a real shame, and it's something I hope they correct in the future. But after all this, what do you guys think? Who do you think would be the orcs' favorite enemy and why? Now personally, I'm leaning towards regular old humies, as they've got the most history with them outside of the necrons and the Eldar, but none of the boys
interesting. I would have said the beakies are their favorite.
Today remember the war in heaven, and they don't keep written records. So from the modern orcs' perspective, humies, or more specifically the beakies, are the ones that check off the most boxes when it comes to traits a good enemy should have.
Yeah.
If you like this video and you want to see more content like it, do me a favor and hit the like button, leave a comment, and maybe subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And share this with your friends. It helps me out a lot, and I really appreciate it. Also, sorry if I sound a little bit off in this video. I've got a wicked bad flu, but it was the day I was supposed to record, so we're just making our way through it. Also, maybe check out the other videos I've got linked here in the end screen. I just recently made one on all of the differences between psychers and sorcerers, as most people incorrectly assume that they're the same thing. And I also made
I'm people.
a how-to guide on how to properly summon a demon, at least in 40K. I had to dive into some pretty obscure source material for those two, so they're worth checking out if you like chaos lore. Anyways, as always, big thanks to everyone who supports all the work that I do, and I will catch you all on the next one.
Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Please give me a like, comment, and subscribe to help me feed the algorithm gods. And let me know of any other videos you want me to react to.